Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Just before we start, I want to thank the elders for coming out, chief and council, band members, our consultants, and our trustees as well for coming out. We want to start the agenda here because one of our consultants has to be in Manitoba by, he claims 2 o'clock, but so if I could get George Casias come and say the prayer for us, the opening prayer. Well, thank you again. I just want to give you a little bit of some information here. You'll see that some cameras are set up just in front here, and this is being broadcast live, to our members who have computers, so they can go into our website, our trust website, and they'll see this meeting being done live. Okay, so I just wanted to bring that because if you have questions, people from Edmonton, if they're on their computer, they can hear those questions, they can hear the answers as well. Okay. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first presenter. It's you probably know that we changed banks in the last year and a half. I guess a year and a half ago, we went from Peace Hills Trust to the Royal Trust, and basically for better service. And to this point, they've provided that service for us. And so Leon is going to give us a little more information of what they provide and how it benefits us as a trust and also members as well. So Leon.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here again this year. Happy that it was a very nice drive up for Regina. I'm the one who has to run back to Manitoba here today, so my apologies if I skip out on you a little bit early today. I'm going to talk about our role, Royal Trust's role, as the custodian of the 1907 Surrender Trust. I'll also talk about my role as the sole trustee with the 2016 Miners Trust as well. I'm going to leave on the 1907 Trust. I'm going to leave the numbers up to the investment managers and the accountants to discuss those, but I'm definitely going to give you an idea of what my role is. So again, we're going to first talk about the 1907 Surrender Trust and Royal Trust's role in that trust. So tell you a little bit about Royal Trust to begin with. The department I represent is Aboriginal Trust Services. Our department was established in 1991. We're a team of trust and investment specialists, and we manage trusts exclusively for First Nations. So that's what we do all day long, is we manage First Nations trusts. We currently have in excess of 60 of those across the country, and we like to say from sea to sea to sea. And we have offices in Victoria, Vancouver, Calgary, and Winnipeg. Our role for this trust is defined in the trust agreement as institution. Our job is to hold the custody of the assets. So what that means is that our job as custodian is to hold all the investment assets, and then we provide the background investment and trading movements for our investment managers. We receive the instructions from the trustees to make any payments, and the idea behind the custodian is to, again, to hold the assets and protect the assets for the beneficiaries, and the beneficiaries are you people, the members of Fishing Lake First Nation. We do not act as a trustee on this trust, simply as a custodian, and in that regard, I'm leaving all the information on the investment assets and the accounting up to the accountants and the trustees and the investment manager. Our other job is to ensure that the minimum amount of $35 million is maintained at all times. So when we get a direction in from the trustees, it's our job to make sure that that $35 million floor is managed. Our job is also to transfer the annual income when we receive the Schedule H request from the trustees, as well as to transfer the annual distribution, again, when we receive the schedules, appropriate schedules signed by the trustees. In addition to that, we transfer the funds for the authorized expenses in accordance with the approved budget. And again, that's based on the Schedule E that we receive, so the authorization from the trustees. The other transfers that we're involved with are for any purchases of land, and again, those requests come from what's called a Schedule G from your trustees, and this is all in accordance with the trust agreement. There was an initial transfer up to $400,000 to complete the original per capita distribution, and then a transfer of up to $4 million for a one-time adult per capita distribution as well, which we handled. So the additional duties of the institution, and that's what we're called in this case on this trust, is in cooperation with the investment manager, we prepare and provide the trustees the following items. Monthly written statements, so statements of all investment transactions, all withdrawals from the trust. An estimate of the annual income 30 days prior to the fiscal year. So it's a joint venture of determining that along with the accountants to make sure that we have a really good estimate for the trustees so that they can do their work. And then on or before January 31st of each fiscal year, we provide a written statement outlining the amount of the annual distribution that will be made on March 31st of that year. So these are all defined and qualified within the trust agreement. And that is the nuts and bolts of my position, Royal Trust position with the 1907 Trust. I'm going to now talk about the 2016 Miners Trust that evolved from the amendment of and restating of that trust agreement. And a little bit of background for you. So the First Nations settled $1.2 million to that Miners Trust on March 2nd, 2016. The First Nation, and this is a definition right from the trust agreement, wished that the approved payments to minor members of the Fishing Lake First Nation in the amount of $2,000 per member be held in trust until such member reaches his or her 18th birthday. So my role with this trust is as sole trustee. So I am custodian and trustee on this trust. I receive my direction from Chief and Counsel on this one, but again, I hold the assets and we actually manage the investments of these assets as well. The investments are to be held in very safe and secure investments in order to make sure that there are no losses on that portfolio so that we can maintain the value and as well as some interest for those minor payments. We also then prepare payments by check upon written request from the First Nation for those minor members who have reached the age of 18. And here's the numbers. So right from the time we started this trust, March 2016 to the end of July 2017, I've broken down the payments for you. So the miners born in 1998, there was 13 of them that were paid for a total of $26,224. So that's their $2,000 plus whatever interest had accumulated for them. And then for miners born in 1999, there were 16 that have been paid as of July 31st for a total of $32,565. Now, there's a list of miners, and then there was allowances made for individuals that may not have been captured on that list. And I'm going to walk through the process for you here in the next slide of what that process looks like in terms of getting their money. So the trust value as of December 31st, 2016 was $1,190,986. The trust value as of the end of June 30th was $1.1 million approximately. So we've been able to make it grow a little bit even with the conservative investment profile that we were given. But our principal objective is to maintain the principal balance of that and have some interest payment for those individuals. So in terms of the minors trust process, the First Nation is to confirm in writing to the trustee, so that's myself, Royal Trust, the trustee, the age and identity of the child entitled to a minor's payment. Once we receive that confirmation in writing, we then issue a check payable to that child in the amount of $2,000 together with all interest received on that payment. And here's an important point, accrued up to the end of the month preceding that child's 18th birthday. So for example, for a child who turned 18 here in August, their accrued interest is based on the end of July numbers. So I know in our office, your band office who sends this information to us, they're aware of this, but I know sometimes some of the parents and minors aren't, is that it for a minor in August, it's usually mid-August before I can issue a check, because I don't get my July numbers in until the end of August, or end of July, pardon me, so that I can calculate the payment for them. So just a note for you there. If that minor person's birthday was on 6th of August, it's impossible for me to get you a check on the 6th of August. So there's a little bit of time lag there so that we can make sure we crunch the numbers properly so they get the proper amount in terms of interest due to them by the end of the previous month. So just an important note there. The child is not entitled under any circumstances to any further interest beyond the end of the month preceding their 18th birthday. So another key point. So let's say we get the information for an August birth date in November, they're still only going to get the interest payable to the end of July. So an important note there. So there may be some minors who may not come forth for a couple of years. They're only going to get the interest that was due to them by the end of the month preceding their 18th birthday. So very important point there. Once we've received all that information, we've calculated the amount due to that individual, we then deliver the checks to the First Nation. The First Nation then is responsible for delivering the checks to the child. So we've worked out a process with the band office that they do their best to try and proactively contact these individuals to make sure that we know where they are and how to get a hold of them and how to get that check to them. So I'll make this point. If you, the community, know of individuals that are entitled to a minor's payment, please let them know that, and please have them contact the band office. And we have an individual, give us a wave please, Ms. Linda, who's working on that for us right now, and she's done a very nice job of maintaining that process. If after the six months the First Nation cannot deliver the check because the child can't be found, then the check gets returned to us. Well, in fact, it becomes stale dated and can't be cashed. And then that money is deposited back into the trust until that child comes forward, and we verify that they qualify, and then we would reissue a check again. Which is so my point here being that if we can, as a community, proactively find these children and notify them and get them in touch with the band office, it really helps. Because if there's a bunch of, and Linda's doing a very nice job of proactively trying to find these individuals, but if we cut a whole pile of checks and they 6 months goes by and they don't get collected and they become stale dated, what it does is, because we've taken that money out of the trust to pay those individuals, it kind of skews the numbers for the rest of the kids later on, and then all of a sudden that money gets deposited back. So it really makes it a difficult calculation for us. So if, as a community, if we can make sure that we proactively go out and find those kids and find out where they're located and how to get the money to them, it would be very beneficial. So if the child then claims the funds before the dissolution date, so they turn 18 tomorrow, they have to the date, what we call the dissolution date, when this trust has spent all its money and it's no longer in existence. They have up until that date of the trust to receive their original amount owing. So, potentially someone in the first year has, 17 years to come forward and collect that money. We'd like to do it much sooner for them than that, though. So again, I'm saying as a community, let's try and find those kids and get that money to them. If the child does not claim those funds prior to that dissolution date of the trust, then their entitlement is forfeited. Here's another important note. If the child is physically or mentally disabled to the extent of being unable to manage their own affairs, the child's entitlement is to be paid to such person as identified by the First Nation as responsible for that child's maintenance, education, and advancement in life. So that was a very important decision that was written into the trust agreement to make sure that those children were looked after as well. Should the child die before their 18th birthday, the child's entitlement will be paid to the child's estate in care of the Department of Indian Affairs and administered pursuant to the Indian Act. So if we have children that qualify for that payout but have been deceased, this will be the process that we follow, and the first step is to contact the band office, and we'll get the process moving from there. In terms of compliance, I'm very pleased to say that all withdrawals and distributions are compliant with the terms of the trust agreement, and very happy to say that we work very well with your First Nation to ensure that the terms of the trust agreement are met and addressed. And we meet a couple times a year with Chief and Council and our administration staff on the Miners Trust to make sure that that's all operating appropriately. On the main trust, we meet at least once a year with your trustees, and I guess with an election coming up and new trustees, we'll be meeting again soon to do a trust workshop and that sort of stuff to make sure everybody understands how their trust agreement operates and that we're all on the same page in terms of making sure that it continues to operate smoothly. And with that, any questions for me? Yes, Chief. Right, so you can get the BCRs in advance to me, but in terms of the calculation for determining the amount that the individual gets, that interest calculation is to the end of the month preceding their birthday. So for example, for an August birthday, our calculation is as of the trust value and the amount of number of minors remaining to be paid at the end of that previous month. So it takes me a couple of weeks to do the calculations, to get all the investment numbers in and get the proper calculations in. So there's a bit of a lag time from the time we get the BCR to when we get the investment numbers in and then calculate and cut the check for them. Well, thank you very much. We're very pleased to be part of your community and having the pleasure of doing our work for you on these two trusts, and I'll hand it back to Bill.
Thanks, Leon. When he mentioned that there is going to be new trustees coming on board, I think we've had two vacant positions from the reserve and two vacant positions from the off reserve trustees. So, and I think people have already applied, to my understanding, and those selections will be made shortly. Just for myself, I didn't reapply. So I've been on the trust for 17 years, and I always tell people at some point, I'm almost 70 years old, and I want to retire at some point, to walk away from a lot of things. I still sit on different boards as well in Regina, so I'm still kept busy, with those different boards that I sit on. So I'm not totally going to be doing nothing at all. So I just want to thank the trustees for the membership and Chief and Council for the support that I've gotten for the last 17 years of sitting on the trust, and sometimes I've had some pretty rough meetings in the past, and but by and large I always hear positive things of what the trust is doing and what it's doing for the membership as well. So I just wanted to let you know that I really appreciate the support that I've gotten over the last few years. The one thing I did want to mention, though, is that you know, as a band member, you know, things really move slowly a lot of times. You know, and I've noticed in 17 years, you know, nothing much has changed in 17 years. You know, we still seem to be at the same, you know, level as where we were at 17 years ago. Now things are changing automatically, you know, just by the information that I'm getting recently, you know, that things are changing dramatically. You know, over the last 2 years, we've had an economic development committee established. You know, they've signed partnerships to go into business, you know, and stuff like that. So things are really changing, you know, not fast enough for a lot of people, but things are really changing. So I just want to mention that as well. You know, it takes a long time because historically, you know, we've had different governments for a 2-year, and sometimes, you know, some of the priorities change from one government to the next, right? So maybe that's why, you know, it's things have been moving really slowly. But now with the last Elections Act, you know, we've got a government in place for 4 years, so maybe we'll move along a little faster than we did in the past. Okay, so that's something I've recognized at any rate, just being a band member. Okay, so our next presenter is Steve Phillip. Yes.
First of all, I want to acknowledge the opening prayer and the comments made this morning. I want to acknowledge the elders sitting here and all the band members, the technical people, and yourself and the trustees. I'm right behind you in age, and by the way, Bill is my relative. I've known him for many years, and yes, he did get some hard times over his term, 17 years, but there has been some good times as well. You talk about change. Yes, there has been really no change, but yes, there has been change, because there has been money filtered out of our trust that we still don't know. We have no paper trail on those, so that's a big change that we need to really look on and be, you know, we need to critique those areas as well. I'll jump to the trustee positions. There's 2 on and 2 off reserve. There was really no information on those dates and anything else. Like August the 2nd was the deadline date, found out through word of mouth, and they had no time at all, so I'm assuming it was 12 o'clock at night. And now there hasn't been I don't know if there were calls to the to the applicants to give them an interview, time and place, and when will selection committee be given. Like, none of these are on paper. All you hear is word of mouth, and when you talk to someone and request information, they don't know either. So I would highly, highly recommend we start doing things on paper. We start giving this information and proper documents so we can follow them and we don't fall out of the loop. I think that's very important. After all, this is a $46 million in trust that we have, and we have to have people on the top of everything, on top of everything. Thank you, Bill.
Much appreciated. Thanks for those comments. So Steve has, you know, was our original lawyer. You know, he helped us draft the previous trust agreement, and so when we decided we were going to change the trust, we asked Steve to come back because he was really familiar with the old trust agreement. So he helped us develop the new trust agreement as well, because we needed changes, because, you know, we heard as trustees the community wasn't getting a benefit. The current membership weren't getting benefits from the trust, so we had to make changes to where we got rid of the minimum amount, you know, based on revenues realized, you know. So we got rid of that, and now the band is you know, obviously benefiting from the changes as well. So Steve is going to go over some of the, you know, information that we've probably had before, but I think he just wants to reiterate, you know, how the trust benefits the membership as well. Steve.
Thanks, Bill. And I want to also thank George for the prayer, chief and councilors and trustees and band members. It's a pleasure being out here today. I don't really have a lot to report on in terms of my involvement with the trust in the last year since the last annual meeting. And to my view, that's a good thing, because that means that I think I've done my job, and the trustees are now doing their job, and you've got your experts, you got Leon, and you got Kelly Rogers, and you got all the people you need in place. You got Jarostowski Fraser, and all this stuff is going the way it's supposed to be going, and I think that's a good thing. Okay, so I mean, I don't think I even met with the trustees this year, because they just really didn't need for me to come meet with them. So I think that's a good thing too. They're doing their job, and I think that you should give them a pat on the back for that. And I think you should all give Bill a big pat on the back. 17 years, that's a big commitment, and I think that's great. And it's been a pleasure, you know, when I come back and forth. I started out with the trust right at the beginning when it was first established, and Bill was there, and it's gone on since then. So that's been good to have that continuity. So I mean, from a reporting point of view, all we really done is help the trustees with some of the reserve creation. You know, every now and then we get you know, a phone call for an answer. We've got Bev, who's been new in administering the trust, and she calls me once in a while just to make sure she knows what she needs to do and make sure the terms of the trust agreement are being followed. A few land selections, and you're going to get a more detailed report this afternoon in terms of the land that's been purchased and where it's at in terms of the reserve creation process. But we only assist when we get a call or asked to do something. Recently we've sent in some transfers of title because we're getting really close. The trustees are getting really close and getting land into reserve status. There was 3 of them that we sent in the last few years, and they're getting just a few minor things need to be done. I think one is waiting for an order in council. One is a Sask Power easement needs to be discharged or replaced. And then there's one just that purchase in Kelvington. It's a small purchase, a couple of acres. It's actually been transferred into Her Majesty the Queen's name, so that means you should be getting word, if you already haven't, that it's in reserve status. So that process is moving. It's moving forward. Everybody would like it to move faster, I'm sure, but you know, it can, but not necessarily, depending on the issues that they're outstanding. I think that the one thing you'll find, and I know Bill made the comment that you know, there's the community is no further ahead, or not real far ahead, 17 years. And I haven't been around the community for those full 17 years, but I see some improvement. Just from my perspective, I see the community moving forward. Whether it's little or whatever it is, I do see it moving forward. This trust is really only one vehicle for the community to look at. I know it's an important part. I mean, there's lots of money there. You know, $25 million you started out with in the trust after you made those initial expenditures, and now it's in the 40s. And hopefully it's going to continue to grow, not to the same extent, because now you're taking money out on an annual basis through that annual distribution, which is going to allow the community to, I think, further move forward, and maybe at a quicker pace than what it's been doing. But I remember standing here in this hall when we were voting on the settlement, and we were voting on the original trust. Can't believe I can remember that, because my memory, I say it's really good, it's just short. But I actually remember standing here, and I said, when we established this trust, I said to the community, you're not going to see a lot of benefits immediately out of this. You're going to have to be patient, because of the way it was established, it was really limiting in terms of how much money was going to come out. And it did its job. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, and exactly when we were discussing it, the council at the time and the negotiating committee at the time, that it was put in place, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. But I understood And I knew at the time you guys are going to become frustrated with it. And that was the impetus to get moving forward with the amendments that happened, you know, a couple years ago. And now I think that you're going to see, because that money is going to be coming out on an annual basis, and assuming the council's doing what the council's supposed to be doing, and you can only assume that that's what's going to be. If they do that, you will see more benefits coming out of that, out of the trust, on a more regular and a quicker basis. And I think that was the whole goal of the amending of the trust, is to get those funds out of the trust and into the First Nations hands, so that they could use them in whatever fashion the council and the community felt was in their best interest. Now, I think that the one thing that I applaud the council in doing, and I haven't been really involved with it because I don't do a lot of legal work with the First Nation, is they're getting into economic development. And I think you're going to find that in the long run, those are the things you're going to need to do. I see it with the other communities I work for, and I used to work for about 20-some, and I've probably over my career have worked for into the 30s First Nations. I only work for really 2 right now on a regular basis, because they're machines. They're getting to be machines, and they're making a lot of money, and it's all through economic development. And so if you want to move forward on a quicker basis than what you're doing, that's where you need to look to, okay? And I know you're doing that with the Economic Development Board and all that kind of stuff, and I think you should just continue on that basis. You've got the trust now, you've got money coming out on a regular basis. If I'm a member, I'm going to hold the council accountable to report how they're spending the money. That's what you should be doing to your council, is say, because once a year they're supposed to give you a report, supposed to give you a financial statement, they're supposed to hold a meeting so that you know exactly, you know, that 1.2 million or give or take is coming out to the community every year, how it's being spent, okay? And I think that because I come here, well, I think it's once a year now, and hopefully that's the way it'll be. That means everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Okay? And I think that's a good thing. That means that the people that you've retained, Royal Trust and the investment people, are doing the job that they're supposed to be doing. The trustees are doing the job they're supposed to be doing, and the council's doing the job they're supposed to be doing. Okay? So that's probably about all I have to report on, or to say if there's any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, there is something I did forget as well when I was introducing our presenters as well, that we do have new staff as well that started just this year. So Bev, if you want to just wave your hand. Bev is our new trust manager, okay, and if you have any questions about the trust, and you know, Bev we'll answer those questions for you as well. We also have, in the past, we've also had Darren Slippery. He couldn't make it to the meeting today, but basically he's helping Bev in the office as well. So those are our 2 staff members. Okay, moving forward, we've got our next presenter is from Jerislowski Fraser, Don Herman. It's a real tongue twister. But we've always had Chad in the past, but Chad, I think, had other commitments, so he couldn't make the trip out. So Don has always come out with Chad anyway, so he'll go through the presentation, and I think he's got it on PowerPoint as well.
Yes, thank you, Bill. Let's see if I can get this. First of all, I'd like to recognize Elder George for the wonderful prayer we had today. Chief and Council, trustees, thank you very much for inviting us here and allowing us to participate on your land. Great opportunity, and it's nice to be back. As Bill has said, I've been here several times. I think my first time was back in 2005, 2006, and have been back and forth over the past 10 years. Continue here. There we go. You have in front of you a copy of a presentation. It's a color version. There's also some black and whites if you don't have, or if we've run out of copies. I'm going to go through what I think is a very good story, and something that we're very proud of in assisting the community with over the last 17, I think almost 17 years now. Also want to thank the people who are joining us by the internet as well, and welcome. I'm first going to talk about where the money is invested. I'm then going to talk about a little bit about how and some of the companies and some of the returns that we have, and finally end up with an announcement that I think will help and assist the community and many communities across Canada on the educational front. So if you look up here at the table, and if you look at your sheet, the very first page is the asset mix, and that simply tells us where the money is invested today. If you take a look, we still continue to have a relatively low weighting in what we call fixed income. That's the bonds and the cash. Cash remains about 4%, which is invested in money market, very short-term investments. The bond portfolio is invested anywhere from 2 years up to 30 years, and the trustees get a report detailing which bonds we hold. And if you think about the bonds again, and probably the simplest way to do it is a bond is simply a loan to a company or to a provincial or federal government, and they pay you interest, and that interest generates revenue for you and income. That weighting hasn't changed for a number of reasons. Interest rates for the last 10 years, because of the economic dislocation we had in 2007, 2008, has driven interest rates globally to very low numbers. So typically today, a 10-year government bond is going to give you 2%. Well, that's not a very good representation of a return when something like Royal Bank is going to give you a dividend of 3.5% to 4%. So my question would be, where do you want your money? With the Royal Bank or with the federal government? Who's going to pay you more? We look at the Royal Bank, and so we're overweighted in the equity space, and those are stocks that pay us dividends. The comparison date here is June 30th, 2016. That would have been when Chad and I think Josh was out here as well, were last here, and June 30th of this year. And what you can see is we've added a little bit of money to, or a higher allocation to the Canadian equity market. We've taken some money out of the US, and we've added also to the international. The reason we've taken money out of the US has nothing to do with Mr. Trump. It purely has to do with the performance of the US stock market over the last 5 years. And if you flip over to the next page, you can see that the total return in the US market has been very, very, very good. In fact, the equity market, it's over the last 10 years have been exceptional. So there's two spots I want to draw your attention to. The first part is the total return, which is the very top line. That's the performance of your trust monies over the last 10 years, and the amount of value add, the amount that we have outperformed your benchmark in bold. The second part is I want to draw your attention to the 5-year mark. And the reason 5 years sort of generates or demonstrates a general economic cycle. Granted, the cycle for the economy over the last several years has probably been more in the 7 to 10 year range, but let's just take a look what's happened over the last 5 years. And you can see that the Canadian, our Canadian equities have done 12.3%. That seems pretty good. But when you look at the US, it's at 20%. And this is unprecedented. I mean, these are really high return numbers for the equity markets over that period of time. And also, in addition, the international equities, non-North American companies, have returned over 14%. So really, the US over the last 5 years has outperformed the other equity classes by almost 6%. So because of that, the value of those companies, the worth of those companies are at all-time highs. And you can see it in the stock market today when you hear or the reports that You know, we're at 22,000 in the Dow. This is an all-time record. It broke through this year. So it's because those valuations are so high, we're taking money off the market. We're taking money out of those companies and reinvesting in the companies that haven't done as well over that period of time. If you look at the statement account as of June 30th, you can see the book value. The book value is what we paid for the portfolio. So when we started managing the money and the trust, we had an initial contribution of roughly $29,700,000. Over the next 17 years, interest, dividends have gone to raise the book value, what we paid, to be a total of $36 million. And our value add to the portfolio is that gain of $5.8 million. So the trust today at June 30th was $42 million. Yeah, so our initial contribution, the money that we started with, was $29 million. The book value today, so over time we've bought and sold a number of stocks, and that resets the book value. So the book value of the portfolio was $36 million, and the market value today is $42 million. Low risk investments. Yeah, so I think if you talk to our friends at Royal Trust and to the people who do the analysis on investment councils, you'll find that we, through the last 10 years, are one of the lowest risk managers. So how do you define risk? In the simplest of ways, it's defined as volatility. And what's volatility? Simply, do your returns do this? Or do your returns do this? So what we have found through the analytics that other companies do on all investment counselors is that we have the lowest risk. We're in the bottom 3% of risk, and we're in the top 20% of returns. So we're getting great returns in a very low risk environment. Yes, please. That's a great question. So the question was, why, because of the politics in the US, the very unstable politics that we've had over the last little while, does the stock market continue to go up? Does that sound fair? So and we were talking to the trustees about this a little earlier on today. Think of politics as noise. And Mr. Trump is tremendous at generating noise in the market. He wants to focus on him. What companies are doing is saying, look, where can we best invest our money worldwide to make better returns for all of our stakeholders? So the companies are making their decisions and have made their decisions over the last 5-10 years, irrespective of who's in government. If they thought the US economy and the US market and US taxes were going to be favorable, they'd invest more money into the US. If they thought there had better opportunities outside there, they would invest globally. So when we look at the US stock portfolio and the companies that are there, they're not all invested in the United States. They're invested globally. And I think Chad and I have talked about this before. So if you look at somebody, well, let me give you a good example. Let's look at Google. I think Google's probably, and I've got a slide of Google later. Google or Alphabet. Well, yeah, it's in the US, it's based in California, but truly, Google is a worldwide dominant stock. So what happens in the US will affect part of the portfolio, but what happens worldwide is more important, and their growth opportunities are truly based on the internet, which has no real domain, no real land. It's really invested around the world. Something like Home Depot would be another good example. They have a high distribution and a high concentration in the US, but they also have investments outside, such as Canada. So they're investing their money outside as well. So despite what's going on in the US election cycle or the US politics, for the most part, the companies are trying to ignore that and invest where they think they have the best opportunities. Does that make sense? Thank you for the question. So where are we invested in Canada? We put a quick little graph here together to show you that we have a high concentration in Canadian financial institutions, Canadian banks and insurance companies. And really, if you look at Canada as a whole, where can we invest our money? Where can we invest for our stakeholders? There's really sort of three opportunities. There's, the financials, so banks and such. There's energy companies, and there's material type companies. So commodities, copper, nickel, forestry, those type of companies. And that makes up almost 3/4 or 70% of your investable assets. So it's not surprising to see that we have a strong allocation to Canadian financials. If you go back and you remember, as I think I was called an elder this weekend, and my mind is a little bit better than my colleagues here. I had a 2-year-old child on the plane call me grandpa, and that was kind of an awakening considering my kids are 13 and 16. But if you think back to 2007, 2008, it was the worst financial crisis that we've had globally in 100 years. And if you looked at what happened to the banks globally, they got beat up very, very bad. But what came out of that was that Canada has one of the best banking systems in the world. And if you're going to invest in a bank somewhere, Canada was a great place to start. So the reason we have a high concentration of financials is because they are world-class financial institutions. If we look at some of the energy companies that we have, Canadian Natural Resources, Enbridge, Pembina Pipelines. I know there's some debate inside the Indigenous community on pipelines, but these are world-class companies that we're investing in, and therefore we'll take those positions. If we look at the U.S., where we invested today, I can tell you, I remember a very distinct meeting, and I think a couple of you were here because I remember some of the lovely faces. We were asked, where do we invest in the U.S.? And one of the answers, well, we invest in Disney. And I think the response was, oh, another Mickey Mouse stock. But at that time, Disney was a very, very good company. Yeah, it was, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, the entire hall was filled at that point. There must have been 200-300 people here. So what we had a lot of in the U.S. was a lot of healthcare and a lot of consumer staple companies. Because in Canada, we don't have a lot of healthcare companies. We don't have the Pfizers of this world, the GlaxoSmithKlines, the Roches, or the Medtronics. We have Valiant, and we've never invested in Valiant. So when you look at the U.S., we try to find other opportunities, and the big difference from the portfolio probably over the last 10 years has been this move to information technology. And it really is sort of the shining light of the portfolio today. Is a core holding. Technology is where we're going. I mean, we're doing part of the meeting today on podcast, a live webcast. So we would never have done that 10 years ago because we didn't have the technology. So technology is continuing to improve our lives and improve our ability to communicate, and certainly add a tremendous amount to the portfolio. And we'll talk about a couple of them, but the classic examples are Microsoft and Google, or Alphabet as it's known in the system. Financials, there's also some great financials in the US, JP Morgan, Berkshire Hathaway, of course that's Warren Buffett's company. Those are stocks that we like there as well. So we have a decent weight in financials. We also have a decent weight in healthcare companies, Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic. One of the fastest growing diseases in the world is diabetes. It has a huge effect on the Indigenous community. I've been wearing my Medtronic insulin pump for the last 10 or I guess 8 years now, and it's a fantastic technology assisting everybody in all communities to live with that disease much better. In the international space, again, we have absolutely. What type of stocks do we have? Well, again, Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, DaVita. So if you think of DaVita, Bristol Myers, Pfizer, they're drug companies, so they're people who actually make drugs. IMS Health and United Health are healthcare providers. So what the interesting part is, when you look at what's going on in the US, they want to remove Obamacare. So what you have to look for in the investments is something that's not going to be terribly affected by Obamacare. So you invest in drugs and you invest in some of the providers that can benefit. So you're almost playing two sides. So if they manage to repeal parts of Obamacare or the American Health Act, which is amazing because people in the US don't realize they're the same thing. So you want to make sure that you have a reasonable distribution across all type of healthcare companies, not just the pill providers, but also the providers for healthcare long-term assistance as well. It's a good question. Internationally, financials, we're going to talk about one of them in the last section. Also healthcare, another good opportunity internationally. And if you go back to the asset mix page, we've taken about 2.5% of the money that was invested in the US and moved it to the international space. If you look at Europe, which represents about 55% of the investments, they're about 2 to 3 years behind where the US was after 2007, 2008. So they're starting to see their markets accelerate. They're starting to see some good growth there. And we have a lot of confidence that we can have some good returns for the portfolio and for our stakeholders and yourselves going forward. The other part, Japan, United Kingdom, that makes up almost 85% of the portfolio. So basically in the developed markets. We believe that there's two ways to attack the emerging markets. One is directly, which we were talking to the trustees about, but also indirectly, which means have those companies, as I was talking about earlier, that have global reach but are based in a local country. So the perfect example is Nestle. Nestle's an interesting company because it's 35% of the Swiss market, but yet it truly is a global company. So it was a lot like Nortel was back in 2002. Much better company than Nortel was in 2002. Sort of the outlook going forward and where we're going to concentrate the rest of the investments for the next year or so. We have rising interest rates now, so we have a growing economy in Calgary, Canada. Calgary does not have a growing economy. So Canada looks pretty good. The central bank here is starting to raise interest rates. The central bank in the US is raising interest rates. That's their belief that inflation is going to come along, which is another reason we're decreasing the amount of bonds that we have in there, because inflation has a negative impact on the bond portfolio. And we believe that growth globally is going to be fairly mundane, 1.5% to 2%. But in that environment, which it has been for the last 10 years, you've seen the portfolio has done very, very well. So there is still good opportunities out there, but we're sort of holding pat for the next little while. One of the other reasons we see growth being a little bit slower is that consumer debt levels are extremely high, and in addition, an aging workforce. One of the things you really need for growth is a baby boomer generation. And I'm at the tail end of the baby boomers in 1963, and if I'm being called grandpa, you know that the workforce is getting a little older. And we need the youth of today to be there to pick up what we've done in the past. Give you a little idea of some of those stocks. Saputo in Canada, #1 cheese producer in North America, great company. Milk to Go, a number of other things. Here's a true Canadian success story that's had global success. So they have operations in Europe and the US. And we paid for it $33.98, and it's in the last year, and it's trading at $41.25 today. Go back one. There we go. Alphabet, Google, another great company. You can see there, Google's just not the internet. They are driverless technology. They are smart home technology. They are much more than what you see here as Google on the internet. Absolutely fascinating company, and they really are one of the true leaders right now in driverless technology. And we paid $609 US for that stock, and it's trading at 908 when we printed this off the other day. And the other one, BNP Paribas. Most of you may or may not have heard of this particular, but it's a global French bank. Credit cards, corporate banking, fixed income markets, tremendous global player in the markets today. We paid 51 euros for that. It's trading at 63 euros today. Finally, I want to let you know so that you can talk to your youth. And we talked about the One Trust earlier on, but this we believe is a tremendous opportunity for not just your community, but all Indigenous communities. My firm started a Partners Foundation a year and a half ago, and with that we have put to work $50,000 a year for the next 5 years to support secondary education, post-secondary education for Indigenous youth. And we've teamed up with Inspire to provide these $5,000 scholarships. So it's 10 $5,000 scholarships. We went to the federal government and Inspire. The federal government matched that. So there's $100,000 a year for post-secondary education for Indigenous youth across Canada. And if you have anybody in grade 12 who is graduating this year, please let them know, and I've attached this particular slide at the back. Please let them know that this opportunity exists. We would be truly honored if we could send somebody from this community and help supply their education going forward along with the trustees. We think it's a great opportunity, and like I said, it's something that we're firmly committed to. I've also raised from the partnership another $25,000 for 3 years to do specific scholarships at St. Mary's University in Calgary for people who didn't graduate grade 12, to allow them to go pursue a post-secondary education if they haven't finished the grade 12 to start off with. And they provide things like childcare, bus services, and everything, all a part of the program, free of charge. So there's 2 opportunities, and if you have any questions, please talk to your trustees. They'll contact Chad or myself, and we'll be more than happy to get you that information. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. If there are any questions. Oh my God, no questions? Oh, thank you, yes.
I don't have a question. I just want to compliment you on staying with the trust for 17 years. And yes, you are an elder with the trust. Been here a long time.
Thank
What
you.
are we going to do without you?
Listen, Chad will be here, he's much younger.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
As I mentioned, Kelly Rogers couldn't make the meeting today, so Steve will run through her presentation for you as well. So, and the other thing too is, if lunch is going to show up a little late, Jason is prepared to go do the audit, so we might finish early as well. Okay, so Steve.
Thanks, Bill. I'm going to be a poor replacement for Kelly, but as Bill said, unfortunately, there was an accident in her family, a car accident, and her nephew is in intensive care in the hospital in Toronto, and so she was unable to make it. But she did send her report, and you should have a copy of it there. The PowerPoint presentation we'll have up on the screen here, but you should have a copy. And then she had a report that went along with the presentation as well. And I'm just going to do some of the highlights of the report, just so that you have her recommendations. Kelly Rogers works for Rogers Investment Consulting. She's an investment consultant. She's an independent consultant who's been retained by the trustees to help them with the investment of the trust property. That was one of the changes that was made in the amendment when the trust agreement was amended to require the trustees to have an investment consultant as on retainer. So they went through a process. They sent out requests for proposals. There was an interview process, and Kelly was the one that was hired out of that process. So she's been with the trust now for probably a year and a half or so. So this would have been her first full year of working with the trustees on the investment. So she was really just getting herself into the process and what was going on. The one thing they did right at the beginning is there was a new investment policy that was developed, and she helped the trustees go through that process. So some of her conclusions and recommendations are in her report. The one big recommendation, page down, page up. Okay, good. Okay, so I know Don is, he is here. One good recommendation, and he'll be happy, is that she's recommending that Jarislowsky Fraser continues to do a good job managing the portfolio, and they should be retained as the manager. So she's not recommending any changes in the investment manager from Jarislowsky Fraser. And she goes through a number of charts that deal with the performance, and you'll have them in the presentation, and you can see the blue is the total portfolio, and the gold or yellow is the index. So you can see from that Jarislowsky Fraser has been doing a pretty good job in terms of meeting their goals. Fixed income performance, they've done a really good job, or doing a good job, it appears from the returns there. So the blue one is the bonds, the yellow is the index, and the green there is the median. So that's what other investment managers have done, and Jarislowsky Fraser is doing, it appears, as good or better than other investment managers in the bond. Canadian equity performance. Again, you have the blue is what Jarislowsky Fraser has done. The index is in the gold or yellow there, and then the green is the median. And you can see Jarislowsky Fraser is, the 1 year they're right so far lagging a bit, but all the 3-year, 5-year, and 10-year, they've done better than the index and better than the average investment managers in the Canadian equity. U.S. equity, similarly, the performance has been as good or better than the index over the long term, and in comparison to other investment managers. International equity performance. And again, the performance has been better, as good or better than the index or the median investment managers. So again, they're doing a good job there. So that was her PowerPoint presentation. She did have a couple of other recommendations that she's been working on with the trustees. The one thing that she's been concerned about, and I know I've been heard her tell the trustees this, is, well, Jarislowsky Fraser has been doing a good job. Their primary owner, Mr. Jarislowsky, Stephen Jarislowsky, he's 90 years old, so he's getting up in age, and she's been encouraging the trustees to find out what the succession plan is from Jarislowsky Fraser in terms of what's going to happen when Mr. Jarislowsky either retires or dies, and what's going to move forward, because that can affect the performance, what's happening with the employees, what's going to happen with the ownership of the company. And so that's one concern that she's had, and she's been encouraging the trustees to get an answer from Jarislowsky Fraser in terms of what's the process, do they know what the process is, what are their plans, the succession plans. So that's one thing that she was suggesting. Now the other thing that she was suggesting is, and I think the trustees may have been working on this, I haven't had any involvement in it, is that the money that's invested in the United States, there's income that is earned, it's paid out, but a portion of that, about 30%, is retained. It's not paid out to the trust, and it's kept by the U.S. government, so it goes directly to them. You're entitled to that, and there's some work that needs to be done to get that money back, because you can get that money back. It's just a matter of getting an opinion whether it can be reclaimed, and then going through the process of reclaiming it. Now, it's going to cost some money. I think they had a quote of about $12,000 to do that. So it's a little bit of an ouch at the beginning, but just for an example, this past year was about $17,000, $18,000 that was retained, and you haven't seen it. And that's going to go on. You know, the one-time expense in order to get this money back, it's just a one-time expense, but you're losing that money every year. Every year you're losing that money. So you should be taking some steps, the trustees, and Kelly's recommending, and she's helped the trustees to move forward with that. But that's something that would help boost the returns of the trust. I don't know exactly. Can you 3 years? 3 years back? Yeah.
This is relatively new.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 years to go back.
Okay. Stephen? From the U.S. income, is it?
Yeah, it's 15% withholding tax.
Oh, 15%. Okay.
So when we took a look at the statements, it's about $17,000 a year that you will reclaim, and you'll be able to reclaim 3 years of that. So let's just call it, for round numbers, about $50,000 that you'll spend $12,000 to get, but have that on a go-forward basis.
Yeah. So there's a big cost benefit to doing it, right? Question?
You can go back 3 years. So, yeah, you still go back 3 years from that point.
Well, the food's coming in, I see, so.
Okay, sure.
So Stephen is 92, turns 93 this month. Stephen has been out of operations for over 15 years. He's been out of the operations of the firm for over 15 years. Our succession plan was built in 1994 when Stephen gave up over half the company to the existing partners. I am a partner and owner of the firm, so I share in the revenues of the firm. So Stephen is one vote. He is no longer the chair of the committee of Board of Management. We actually have an independent third-party chairman. His name is John Ferguson, who used to be the chairman of Suncor, and he was the guy who merged Suncor and Petro-Canada. Steve is one voice on the committee. His daughter has a position on the committee, and we have 2 partners on the committee. So we have equal votes to Stephen and an independent third-party chairman and 2 other independent members as well. So the board is independent. Succession planning, when Steve passes, there's already a process in place of what happens to his shares. It goes to a foundation. And if the foundation chooses to sell it, then we as partners have first right of refusal. So from our perspective, succession issues were handled years ago. But because Steve is still in the office, because Steve has, at 93, is somebody who just loves the investment business, comes in every day. People like to think that he still has more sway than what he actually does with inside the firm. So.
Just a little information further that as well. I mean, as trustees, we do have, the ability to also, split the investment firms as well. We can always, have Jarvis Luxey Fraser, but, if we wanted to be more aggressive in investments, we can also hire, an aggressive investment firm as well. But I mean, that comes obviously with time. I mean, basically, if the members are interested, in putting the assets at risk, it's up to the members to decide that as well. Not yet. Not yet. I mean, it's something that Kelly Rogers, addressed some time ago, and the new trustees, obviously, when they get their education from Kelly, I mean, that will be brought up again, that we do have that ability to split the trust between investment firms as well. Okay, so more draws, and then we'll have lunch. They're just preparing lunch for us, and after lunch, we'll have Jason do the audit, and he assures me it's a pretty clean audit this year. He's not going to talk about too much about the audit, so just give you the numbers, the facts, and questions as well. I guess we're going to get going with our next presenter, and that's our auditor, to give you the information on our audit as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here out at Fishing Lake. Thanks for the lunch. Everyone, thank the caterers there for a great lunch. Thanks to the elders, trustees, chief and council for having me out. I'm going to quickly go through the financial statements. She said they were handed out. I'm just going to highlight a few things in there of importance, and then there's a quick slideshow just giving you a little breakdown of how the money was spent in the past year. So as you go through there, you're going to see some different documents. Management's responsibility. This was signed by the trustees taking responsibility for the financial statements and all the information in there. Okay. So the auditor's report, when you do look at the statements, I'm just going to hit the highlights anyways here. The auditor's report, the big thing whenever you look at a set of financial statements is to look at the auditor's reports, because it'll tell you whether the statements, you can make reliable decisions on them. It doesn't say, are they doing a good job or not? It says, are the numbers there reliable that you can make decisions? If things are in non-compliance, you'll see it in our auditor's report as well. So there's no non-compliance issues. In our opinion is a clean opinion, good opinion. So you can rely on the financial statements to make decisions. So the statement of financial position, the key numbers here are, and a lot of these numbers have changed because we're now 6 months past year end, and you've gone through your investments with JF, and they've given you the up-to-date numbers. You can see that there was, the book value of the investments was 33.6, but there was cash as well at that time of over $3 million. So there's total assets in the trust account of $40 million. They had liabilities of $2.8 million. The position at the end for the trust account is in a positive $37.2 million. And then the authorized expense account, you can see they have negative $295,000 position. So they do have some deficits to make up over time in the authorized expense account. And it's going to get even tougher because their budget has significantly shrunk now with the new rules under the trust agreement. This is the statement of operation. I'll go through my slides and that'll hit on most of how the money was spent, and those have been handed out. They did make printed copies for you of those. The trust account, there's the summary. There was $2.8 million of revenue in the trust account in the prior year. The authorized expense account had $710,000 in expenses, and they had almost $680,000 of budget, so they did go $30,000 over what was allocated in the current year. Besides that, when you look at the financial statements this year, they're pretty much similar to last year, other than the numbers that are in there, and most of the numbers, like I said, are 6 months past, and the important numbers in there are the investments, which JF provided, and we do audit the stuff that JF provides, and there was no issues with the information JF had provided at December 31st. And then at the very end, if you do get the hard copy of the financial statements, the last note will explain all the changes from 1 year to the prior year, the trust amendments, how the minimum amount is now 35 million, and the different terms of how the authorized expense, you can get the money for the authorized expense, and how there's a payment to the First Nation based on a percentage of the market value of the trust. Okay. I just wanted the financial statements hit the important points that there was a clean opinion, no issues in regards to the information in the financial statements. Like I said, we're here, I guess, 7 months after year end, so a lot of the numbers have changed in regards to the investments. But I think the most important part to you guys from the audit is how are they spending your authorized expense money. So the trustees are getting a budget. How are they spending that budget? You see, it was about $730,000 they had to spend. They spent this year. The first slide there, and this was handed out, is how was that piece of the pie, that $730,000 split out? So 30% is gone right away. That was for January 1st to December 31st of 2016. Yeah, the 2016 year, how they spent that money. 30% is eaten up by management fees, so that's Royal Trust and Jaroslawski Fraser fees, and those are pretty much set in stone, standard rates based on a percentage of your assets. And when we look at the rates that they're charging, JF's rates are very reasonable compared to other investments. So I'm sure there's ones that are lower, but there's ones that are also higher, so there's no concerns there. 12% is spent on travel, 8% on per diems, 9% is wages, so the trust manager as well as your lands person. Professional fees, so that's lawyers, accountants, and if they ever need consultants, so like a lot of people here today, myself, Kelly Rogers, Stephen, made up 15% of the budget. 10% on repairs and maintenance, so maintaining the land, any costs or fencing or anything that has to be done in regards to that. 4% for land taxes, and that was Delvina's question earlier, is what's that for? Until the land is converted to reserve status, you still have to pay the property taxes to the RMs on the land. Once it's converted to reserve status, it's in the Crown's, it's owned by the Crown, and then you no longer have to pay those property taxes. But that's what that 4% makes up. And then the other is 12%, and that's a bunch of various office expenses. There's lots of different little things in there. You know, just probably 7, 8 different items that add up to such small amounts. So where is your expenses trending? Overall, you're going to see a downward trend. Expenses are trending downwards, and that's because with the new trust agreement, the budget is limited. We were operating close to $1 million budget. Now it's down to around that $700,000 range. You can see the weird looking one, the triangle. There was a bit of cost in 14 for the trust amendments. 2015 there was lots of costs for the trust amendment, and then no cost in 2016. The other thing is your management fees. You're going to expect that to continue to grow in relation to how much your trust grows, because it's based on a percentage of your investments. But it won't go quite as fast, because the more you have in, the lower the percentage becomes. So it will continue to go upward, but not as steep. The remainder of your costs, you can see, have gone down. Other costs have gone down. Wages have gone down. Travel costs are down. Per diems, they were down. You can see they were almost $100,000 in 2014, $50,000 last year, about $60,000 this year. The reason they're up a little bit this year is because the trustees were busier with trust amendment meetings and stuff last year, so they had more just general based meetings this year. So some of that per diem cost last year would have been in the trust amendments. And then your last slide is, and the trustees asked me to do this last year and again this year, and it's too fast, Kate? The travel was 150 in 2014. It's down to about, let's say, about 85,000 in 2016. And that includes trustees, chief and council, and anyone that needs trust manager as well. R&M, so that's maintaining any of the land you've bought. You do have some repair costs, and there's a lodge and stuff like that. In this case, land taxes, It would fit into the other. It would, I think because we showed it made up about 4% of 700,000, so it'd be about $28,000 a year is what your land taxes would be. So it kind of would be way at the bottom there, so. That's that big one that goes up and then down. So it's one big cost in that 1 year. Yeah. It's the big triangle you can see going up. About 250,000 in 15, and there was a bit of cost in 14, about $40,000, and then that includes all the per diem, chief and council costs, the lawyers, and all the different consultants, and so all the costs in regards to the trust. Yeah, and all that travel, city to city, the membership vote, all that, sending out the mail outs, all that cost. So there's a bunch of small amounts that are added up just because they were too small to fit on the chart. They would have made up of office costs, this meeting, holding this trust meeting, telephone costs, some advertising promotion costs, selection committee costs were $6,000 last year, and then there was some land acquisition costs as well. It was $5,000 last year. So what are the new amendments? So that would have been went through when you guys voted on whether you were going to ratify the trust agreement. So the new amendments are, there's a couple of major ones. The first major one is how much the trustees are allowed to use for the authorized expenses each year, and it's based on I think it's 1.5% of market value of the previous year. So they take the 42 million times 1.5%. Right now it's around that $700,000. They cannot take out more than that for authorized expenses, where in the past they could come with any amount as long as there was enough left over from the previous year's revenue. So there's a cap on how much the trustees can spend. And now every year there's 3% of the past, it's an average of 5 years, gets paid straight to the First Nation. So the First Nation now gets about 1.2 million. That's one of the questions Shirley had earlier, was how was that 1.2? And the trust agreement requires chief and council to provide an audited schedule, and that's going to get done with the First Nations audit, which Chief mentioned will be done here shortly. Those were the major changes. I guess you had been on the trust before. The minimum amount is now just 35 million. So they can spend and take out, right now it's at 42 million. So they got to make sure they have enough to pay the First Nation and enough to operate the trust, but then the rest can be used to buy land, as long as they don't bring it below 35 million. Where in the past it was a continually growing amount based on the previous year's revenues. So now there's a bottom hard cap on what the trust must maintain in the trust. So those were the big things that you guys would have went through, and then it went through a membership vote, what, 2 years ago, or last year I guess it would have been. And then that was part of that was the new per capita payment. It goes into your what's called an Ottawa Trust Fund. There's a revenue account and a capital. So it'll go into your capital account, and then any interest earned on that money that's in there is revenue. And to access that money from capital, chief and council have to do a BCR to ask for that money. And as long as it's in requirements with what the minister says, then you guys can take that money out. They just maintain that trust fund through BCR. So the farmer, if he's renting that land, will make the check, like you said, to the receiver general. It'll go sit in that trust fund. And if you look at your the First Nations financial statements, there should be a line on there that says Ottawa Trust Fund, and it'll show you how much money gets put in each year and how much is sitting there at the end of March. Yeah, through BCR. But then the minister is going to make sure it meets the they'll have to say why they're taking it out and what they plan on spending it on, and then report it in their audit that they've spent it on that. And so if you want to find that information, just go find the First Nations financial statements, which should be online, and you can see that amount on there. It'll show the deposits and the full amount on there.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to find out a bit about the authorized expense breakdown. You're talking about a downward spiral here of changes. Can you go back, if you have statistics or anything, on the last 5 years on the authorized expense breakdown, and what do you foresee in the future, next few years? Is there going to be a downward spiral, like you were mentioning? And costs, expenses?
Yeah, so thanks, Mike. So you can see when you add up all the lines, I've only got the 3 years here, but it was 12, 13, 14 were close to that million. I think last year went slightly over that because they took out extra money for the trust amendment. And then now this year it's down to 700,000. How much they can spend is based on 1.5% of the previous year's market value of the trust. So they'll take they'll say at the end of last year the trust had 42 million market value. They can only take up to 1.5%. So if the value of the trust grows, they can take a bit more out, but 1.5% of 42 million is in that $700,000 range. So if the trust goes up to 50 million, they'll be able to take out closer to 800,000. But if the markets go down, they're gonna have to decrease their budget even further. So the markets are gonna maintain that. And another thing that affects the market value is if they take out $2 million to buy land, well, now your trust only has 40 million instead of 42 million, right? So as they buy land, it's gonna decrease the amount that they'll have available. Okay, thanks everyone, those are good questions. And then this is the last thing, the trustees had asked me to provide this information. You know, there's always questions about how much they're spending on travel, how much they're getting for meetings. So they wanted, you know, be transparent and put it out there. So this is all the trustees for the year, and you should all have this handout, and it shows the number of months they were a trustee, and then what they got for per diems, and then what they had for travel or expenses. And the travel or expenses, in a lot of cases, out-of-pocket costs. They still had to pay for gas, hotels, meals out of that amount. So yeah, so we don't actually audit this schedule, and even when you see the chief and council schedule online, it's not audited. It's part of the audit. We take the information. So any payments that were made to them, I guess if there was any payments made, this is, I guess, any payments that were actually made to them would show up in here when we go through the GL. But we don't go out, we're not auditing. If it says Janelle got $200 travel, we didn't go audit all those transactions, but this is what they're saying that they actually had paid. Yeah, I didn't bring the comparatives. I did have the one last year. I had provided the amount, but it has gone down, and the reason I mentioned is the budget. Well, last year they had the trust amendments, so they were traveling. And then there was also, like I said, the budget has gone down. So if these amounts change much from year to year, then it would be difficult now because their budget's a lot tighter. Deficit, so the authorized expense account, in the current year, they spent $30,000 more than what they got to that 680. Some of that can be timing because you do accruals. You say, well, we owe these people money. So on a cash basis, they're managing on a cash basis, but they probably owed some extra people money at December 31st, but they waited to January to pay them. But we do it on an accounting basis. On the accounting basis, they had a $30,000 deficit last year. But going back, there was 250 before that. So over time, they've created a $280,000 deficit. And we talked to the trustees and how are they gonna cover that off, and they're gonna have to come up with ideas to take it from their budget because the bank's not gonna let them extend their line of credit, and suppliers are gonna start saying, you gotta pay us on time. So, well, that amount would have been, the trustees would have passed that money get paid out, and then chief and council would have been required to report back to the trustees how that was spent.
And that happened?
And I definitely agree, and I think the group of trustees have been doing a good job, and bringing this in here last year was a great start, just to show how much is going, or how much they're getting as being a trustee. And, you know, they're committing time, and some people are traveling from distances too, so. Any more questions? Okay, thank you again for having me out. I'll pass the mic here to Bill.
Thank you, Jason. So our last presentation is on reserve creation and also land leases. And who's doing that? Our presenter was kind of shy to do it, so yeah.
So when we do an audit, we do it based on what's called an accrual basis or accounting basis. So if you owe someone money, so you owe, say, Royal Bank for their fees $10,000, but you haven't actually physically given them cash yet, that shows up as an expense. Doesn't matter, we're not worried about cash, we're worried about, do you owe someone money? So that all the expenses are based on who they owed, it includes what they paid, but plus who they owed money to at your end. Yeah, so if they incurred the expense, so if it was for December fees, but they didn't pay it to January, it shows up as an expense. And then, even though the cash didn't come out until January. Well, yeah, because right now, how are they paying for that is either they owe people money or they owe the bank money because you got an overdraft. So you can't let that continue to grow because the bank's only going to give you so much, and your suppliers are only going to let you have, they may say, okay, we'll let you have 60 days to pay, but after a period of time, they're going to say no more.
Well, what we do, I mean, last year was kind of a good example of that, you know, having to bring forward some, you know, some expenses from the previous year. Now, it won't show up this year, but I mean, next year we had to do that because we had to borrow money from, or have chief and council borrow money for us. So we had to pay all that back to the chief and council for what they borrowed. So that obviously, we had to pay that in the new year budget, right? So we did that this year. And also another one is, a good example, another one is JF. They bill us quarterly. So their bill for October, November, December, we would have got it January 1st, right? So that's an accrual. So we have to pay that in the new year as well. You know, so there's different types of accruals as well. So exactly, yeah. But that won't show up till next year though, because we just paid it off this year, right? We just paid it off this year, so that won't show up until next year's audit. Okay, so our last presentation is our reserve creation August report. So we had Lisa Kanak from Indian Affairs come out here and give a report on all the you know, the information, updated information on each of the parcels of land that we have here. I didn't attend that meeting, so I'm going to be flying just by the seat of my pants here to go through this presentation. Okay, so file number one, and this is all the Nacreco land that we purchased, our first big purchase way back, I think, in 2004. And you can see that, you know, we've got some land that is already going to the ministerial level here, and we got some land where we still have to finish some of the processes, you know, to get it going to the ministerial level here. And you can see that some of it deals with, you know, widening of roads. You know, for instance, I think the land that goes towards Shirley's house there, you know, that they've requested that land or that road be widened, right? We have, you can see that some of the RMs, you know, we've got letters where they've got no concerns. That means they have no environmental issues. I think 2 years ago we did have where the housing development was, you know, that land wasn't being looked after, so we did get a letter from the RM because of noxious weeds, but now that's been looked after. So we've got no problems about any of the land designations here as well. So the ARC stage, as I mentioned, that goes, that's the last stage at the ministerial level. So you can see just from the Quaco land, we've only got one going forward. And that's the one for where the school is going to be designated as well. More of Quaco land, and this is the southeast 160 acres. Yeah, that's the yard. Yeah, that's the yard site where Lindsay lives. I think this is down by the lake, isn't it? There's no land description on this one, so I don't know where this is. But I think they're looking for a to have a. I think right now it's a little mud road, but they wanted to make that into a sort of like a grid road as well. So they wanted to improve that road site, and I think we got the approval for that as well. Yeah, the little road that goes towards the lake there. Yeah. 2 acres was bought back in 2010, and here's the Nielsen land. We actually split this file where the yard site is different from the cultivated acres. So right now we're dealing with the cultivated acres, and I mean there's no issues there as far as we're concerned with the cultivated acres.
What I leased there, is that house, the big white house?
Yeah.
Have you, what are you gonna do with that?
Well, we didn't have no money in the budget to do anything with it.
But at last year, you spent 15,000, you gave one individual 15,000 to do something in that house, and
Yeah, to take out the asbestos.
and then you still got someone from Regina with the big machine and everything to come there, take it out and paid a lot more again.
Yeah.
So why all that waste of money?
Well, the
Why
first
did you
company
keep some-
didn't have the ability to move it,
Yeah.
because you have to have sealed
Should have thought
containers
it
to
out.
move
Yeah,
it.
well, the guy was there before, and then this other guy come along, and then you still have to call the guy from Regina to come and finish the job, but you spent a lot of money on it.
Yeah.
So
Well,
speaking of waste and spending money, stop spending money that way.
The second company had the ability to move it.
Yes.
They had the sealed vehicles to move it
Yeah?
to Yorkton where it was burnt. So
Yes,
those
I
were
talked to
those were the
people
two
regularly,
major
yes.
costs.
Because that's, when you remove asbestos, everybody in the area is gonna get affected somehow in the future.
Yeah.
And that was the danger of that.
Yeah.
And it's
Well-
still sitting there, so I don't know what you're gonna do with it.
No, it's okay now. We've had the inspector look at it, and he's okayed it now to be torn down, because from what I understand, when you remove asbestos, you have to seal all of the inside of the house, and that was done. And they bagged it. So
And while I'm speaking of speaking of wasting money, at the lodge, there was a little house, you know the little house a mile away from there?
yeah.
Now it's just the birds have got in it and the animals have got in it. It's just a big mess now. But you have spent, what did you spend in that house renovating that little house?
We didn't renovate it.
Oh, yes, you do. I have pictures of it. You put gyprock in every room. You put new doors. You worked on the roof, I'm sure. The floors. It's all there. I have pictures of it. I'll show you.
Okay.
What did
No,
you
we
spend?
didn't.
It
We didn't
looks like-
spend we didn't spend no money in
Then
that
who
house.
spent money on that then?
I don't know.
It looks like it's a $30,000 job.
Oh, really? No. I mean, if any work
If
was
not
done on
50.
it. Yeah. This is the house adjacent to the next.
This is the house where the trust lodge is, and there's another, it's about a mile away from there.
Yeah.
It's a little white house.
Yeah.
But that's total mess of money there, loss of money. There is nothing, I don't know what people were thinking of doing with that house, but I'm sure it was band money that went in there,
No.
if not trust money.
It wasn't our money.
Well, then somebody else came along with their goodwill and did spend $30,000 renovation. Come on, I wasn't born yesterday.
We'll have to go out and take a look at it.
Yeah, you should. I'll get the pictures right now.
Yeah, because that's the house that, across the road, eh? From the
Yeah, right
lodge,
into
yeah.
that. It's in the, oh, it's about half a mile off that little trail.
Yeah. And this is the one that we were talking about, the 2 acres by Kelvington. It's reserve status now. Oh, there's Bev now. You'll have to help me out with some of these, Bev. Okay. Watson Lake, or the Watson Ranch file, that's the lodge itself. And we met with St. Philip's RM, and they had no problems with it as well. So, I mean, this is the next piece of land to go forward, you know, for recommendation to go to the minister for reserve status. Any issues there at all, Bev? None at all, I don't think. No. Yeah. So a lot of these files are on hold, actually. You know, just because we're waiting for responses from the RM. You know, and a lot of them on some of the issues that they might have. And this is the land we're talking about. What Shirley's talking about, the other 3/4 across the road from the lodge. And again, I think the only issue there was noxious weeds again.
There's
And
another issue there. That land where you guys did the baling, you guys baled and there was hundreds of bales on those lands. And I asked Janelle what they got for those bales last week or 2 weeks ago. She had no idea because she didn't know who baled that land. Where did those bales go? Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth. Do you mean this farmer just came into the yard, cut the grass, baled everything, and he's gone? Nothing, no paperwork to show. That is major fraud. You need to get the police involved.
Yeah, his body's got the gentleman from our land manager, so our gentleman in the officer is on right now.
Yeah, because that should have been dealt with last year.
yeah, let me see. I think last year, I don't think that was bail last year because there was nothing to bail last year. So what
That was
he's
bales there last fall.
Last
I saw
fall?
them, yes. I went there, I saw the bales there. Yes, there was bill. All the time you're trying to make me look like I was born 2 days ago. There was bales there. Lots of them all over the place.
Yeah, I just can't recall the last time I
Well,
was
you
out there.
probably never went there.
No. Okay, this is the Kelvington file. That's reserve status. I pushed the wrong button here. The Hushalak. This is the land by Insinger, and I think the only issue there is I think Indian Affairs was concerned because this is I think the head start of what river is that? White Sand River. So they had some issues about, you know, what is agricultural land and what is land that is not owned but run by, I guess, managed by Water Corp. Is it Water Corp? Yeah. So there's that issue there. So that's something we still have to deal with. You know, what is part of the river and what is part of our land as well. So we're dealing with that. Cormant Park, we already talked about Cormant Park. We're still, I think, there's a few issues there that we're dealing with. We've had meetings last year with Chief and Council. Department of Highways want to buy the right of way, which is basically, you know, about 13 acres, I think, of the ditch, or 4 acres. They want to back 4 acres just for the right of way in case there's a service road to be put in. So we have to deal with that. We have to deal with Corman Park itself because they want an access road because there's no road going onto the land right now. So we're dealing with them, you know, and they have to give us the specific of what this access road has to look like because I guess they do have a policy on what this access road looks like. So we're dealing with that with Corman Park as well. And those are the only two issues. Oh, that's right. That's right, because there is what they call an ILO, intensive livestock operation, and he claims he's raising turkeys. I don't know, I've been driving by that farm for about 5 years and I've never seen a turkey in his yard. But he claims that, you know, he's raising turkeys, so we have to sign a coexistence agreement with him. And part of that agreement is that we don't build within 300 meters of his farm. So it's something we have to deal with because you know, we will sign that coexistence agreement with him if he signs it. But once it comes to reserve status, we can do anything with that 300 yards then. We can build right up to his fence if we want to. But you know, just to get an agreement with him, just to start the process so that it goes to reserve status. And I think we might have to sign that coexisting agreement. But as I said, after it's reserve status, we can do anything with it. Yeah, yeah, and that's part of the survey that's going out. Yeah, yeah. Right now, the way the land sits, it's eligible to be reserve status. I mean, there's no environmental problems or anything. We just have to sign that coexistence agreement with the farmer before it can go forward to reserve status.
That coexistent agreement is a buffer zone. That is what they're dealing with. The farmer has some type of agreement prior to Fishing Lake owning that land. And in his agreement, he came up with a buffer zone that you can't go within, I think it's 300 meters of his farm of working, actually putting something there. That's the problem there, is the buffer zone. But what we were told is we can go above him with INAC to, rather than, first we have to try make friends with him and come to some agreement. If that doesn't work, we can go straight to INAC to oversee that, to go into reserve status. So that's the problem is,
So the buffer zone would disappear once
reserve status, yes.
INAC gets involved?
That's right.
Yeah. So, yeah, what we do is, you know, if he comes to no agreement at all, you know, and we've tried and tried, you know, to become good neighbors with him, and if he refuses, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we can go straight to Indian Affairs and say, look, he's not being, you know, working with the band. I mean, he doesn't want to work with the band. So then Indian Affairs can go in and just designate that as reserve status. And that goes with any RM as well. You know, in the past, I think we've had issues with other RMs. I can't remember which one, but you know, we had issues with them. They couldn't agree with anything that we had to say. So then we went to Indian Affairs. We showed them all the documentation. You know, here's what we tried to do with that RM, and they still don't want to be agreeable. So then Indian Affairs just went ahead with the process of reserve creation. So that it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen.
Yeah, Bill, just some advice here and some questions I'd like to ask. You're talking about designated land and stuff. I know prior to the trust purchasing any land, you know, and I was on the trust agreement. I was on the whole trust when it started, and so was a few others in here. But I'm looking at the way things should be done in the future and even now. You look at land that's being purchased, you know, a feasibility study should be done on this. Example, Corman Park, you know, we look at it, the infrastructure costs, what are they going to be, what's the cost going to be? How long is it going to take? This is where I'd like to see a good consultant would do a feasibility study and tell the First Nation people. A lot of band members been phoning me and asking questions. What's going on? What's going to happen with that land you guys purchased out there in Corman Park? You know, has there been a plan made, a breakdown, say, for the next 5 or 10 years? How is it going to proceed? Is it going to get the infrastructure in there? I know the first thing we'd like to do is get reverse status on this land, but what's the future? 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? Are we going to build apartments there? You know, the reason I'm questioning this is, how is this land going to pay for itself instead of us paying taxes and stuff on this land? You know, are we looking 5 years down the road to have the infrastructure in there? Are we going to have an apartment in there? You know, what are we going to have on that land? What do we purchase? Is it for residential purpose? Is it for commercial? You know, things like this. I think in the future, any land, if any more land going to be purchased by the trust, including small parcels, there should be a feasibility study done. Look at that land up in where the lodge is. You know, we've been spending more money on it than actually any revenue, anything coming in. We haven't been utilizing it as it was intended for. But this is why I find a feasibility study to be done on any land purchase for the future, for the people to understand, instead of asking questions like this, eh? We could say, okay, this land we bought in Kelvington, for example, the lodge, this is what we're going to do with it, eh? And have a plan set in place. You know, we wouldn't be asking all these questions. I've been getting phone calls from band members from out of the province also on land. What are you guys doing? You got any revenue coming in from it? Yes, I told them the agriculture portion we do have revenue coming in. But other areas we have no revenue. We're actually spending more on taxes and upkeeping of the lands, eh? So I think this is one of the questions. The other one is land designation. You know, you talk about land designation. We should have had our land use policy. I know we've been working on that for many years. In that land use policy, it should be designation of lands in that land use policy also, eh? You know, I don't like seeing INAC coming in there and saying, okay, you could designate land list. I think it should be up to the First Nation to decide what you want to designate land for, eh? So these are my questions. I don't know if you could respond to some of them or not, but thank you very much.
Yeah, and I think when you look at the, you know, the referendum that's coming out, I think that's all being addressed, you know, as to what the land will be used for. And what we do as trustees, I mean, when we're approached to buy land, or if we're looking for land, you know, what we do is we have to make that presentation to council. You know, here's a piece of land, you know, it's 147 acres south of Saskatoon. You know, do you want us to buy it? And they have to give us the reasons of why we buy that land. We never decide as trustees on our own to buy land. We have to take it to chief and council, you know, and they approve it, you know, so they get the final say of what land we buy. Well, I mean, the way we read the trust is that chief and council represent band members.
Is it in the trust agreement, Bill?
I'm trying to think of what article that is for land acquisition. No, I don't think it is. I think what we do is we, you know, if there's someone approaches us or we find land to buy, we take it to chief and council.
The land that was surrendered away to us. So, you know, there was certain criteria, areas that they wanted to buy. They wanted the surrendered land, and then they wanted hunting. There was like 4 or 5 different areas that membership said, okay, when you're purchasing this land, this is what you keep in mind.
Yeah.
So, I remember that was years ago though.
Yeah, that was that 5-year strategic plan that we had back in 2004. And we asked the membership, you know, what do you want to see done in 5 years? And that's where we got the direction back then in that 5-year strategic plan. Members told us, as Jonelle said, you know, buy land, the original land, the specific land claim, and also buy land for hunting and fishing, buy land for commercial use, buy land for housing, you know, and that's where we've got the direction from in that 5-year strategic plan. Now, we haven't had a 5-year strategic plan since then, even though I've been pushing for one, because it costs a lot of money to get members together to give us direction on what to do, right? So maybe next year we'll have that 5-year strategic plan and we'll get direction again from membership, you know, but it has to go hand in hand, with what chief and council are trying to attempt as well, with their land designation, strategy. So yeah. It's something we're trying to get back into. I don't know if you remember, 5-6 years ago, we had when Cheryl Casey Ash was the trust manager, she used to send out newsletters, on a quarterly basis. And Crystal, attempted to do that as well, but she just couldn't keep up with all the information that was going on. So now we're, obviously Bev is a new staff member, so, that'll be one of her jobs, is to have a quarterly newsletter, to talk about all the land designations, everything new that's happening within the trust. Well, right now, because of the water quality, we had to shut it down. I mean, that water is so bad in there. It's you can't use it for anything. You can't even, you can't use it for laundry. You can't use it for even just to wash your hands, because you get sores already, or you get a rash. So what we have to do is we requested to chief and council to, if they would put it in their community development budget. But, they said maybe next year. But next year we also have a bigger budget for the trustees as well, because of all the money we had to pay back from last year. Our budget at the end of the day for this year for our trust business was only $400,000 out of the $700,000 that we got. So we paid back a lot of bills from last year as well. So we're kind of running lean this year on what we could do, and one of them was putting money forward to the lodge. Even if it was just to, get the reverse osmosis installed, that would have cost us about $25,000, and we could have handled that out of our budget if we had a full budget, but we didn't. I think last year we budgeted about $95,000, and that was for everything in the lodge, the water, the propane, the telephone systems, and all that stuff. Paying the employees as well to look after the place. So it was about $95,000. Okay, so here you can see the yard site for the Nielsen yard. This is the yard site here. So it, as I mentioned, it was split between the yard site and the cultivated acres. Kylemore lots. Kylemore lots. I think we had an offer. There was. Oh, is it? Oh, okay. 3 lots. Yeah, they got the deal of the century for those 3 lots. I think they paid what, $1 a piece? Oh, $100 each. Well, that's still a good deal. Okay, well that's it. The one thing I wanted to mention was when Jason was talking about, the more money we make, that 1.5% goes to the trustees. Well, I think in 10 years, it's capped in 10 years, right? So in 10 years, we can't get more than a 1.5% of whatever the market value is in 10 years. So because we just can't continue to, at some point, we get over $1 million budget. Well, so it's going to be capped in 10, we've already used up 2 years of it, so in another 8 years, our budget will be capped. You can stick around, but I want to thank everybody that's been out. I want to thank Bev for putting on a real smooth meeting. It worked. It went off like a charm. I want to thank the cooks for that wonderful lunch. She always provides a good lunch. I want to thank the band members for coming out and showing their interest. Obviously, we have big crowds every year, so that means members are really interested in what's happening with the trust. And I want to thank the trustees, obviously, that I've worked with for the last several years here. So I want to thank them as well. Thank you all for coming out, and I hope you gain some new information. And we hope we can do a better job in the future for band members. Thank you all.